what's up guys? So I am packing up for a trip that I'm leaving on tomorrow morning, and I thought I would pack and talk about something. Might be a little bit of a rant. Maybe I'll call this Pack and Chat, and it's the first episode, I'm not sure. But basically, I have a pile of gear and I gotta try and get it all in my bag. So, basically, this year I bought this sleeping bag, the Thermarest Parsec, and this video isn't about this model or something special about this model. It's about quilts and sleeping bags in general. So, I've been using quilts for pretty much the last 15 years or so. I own two right now, but I've owned a couple over the years. My first quilt was a Ray Jardine kit quilt that I made myself, and I actually used it for years. I made that quilt I think in 2008 or 9 or something like that. And if you think about the history of quilts a little bit, at least to the best of my knowledge, the person that popularized and even coined the term quilt was Ray Jardine. And I think, I could be wrong about some of these things, like this is just going off of memory. I think that was for some of his PCT hikes that he did in the 90s. And if you think about the 90s, what kind of gear was available then? I actually still have my backpacking sleeping bag from the late 90s, early 2000s. The model's a North Face Cat's Meow, I think it's called. And, it probably, and again, this is just going off of pure memory, I'm guessing it weighs like 5-6 pounds. It's a beast. I still use it for car camping type stuff because it's a great sleeping bag, but it's a beast. And I think it was rated to -9. I don't know if it was, if that's actually truthful in any way. My guess is it isn't. I don't think it was ever comfortable down to -9 Celsius. But back in the 90s, when Ray Jardine was doing his PCTs, this is written up in his books, where he just found that the gear and the whole approach just wasn't quite right, to lack of a better way to put it. So, if you're thinking about a 5-pound sleeping bag, well, at the time, if you wanted something lighter, you could make it yourself. So he coined the term quilts. He made this thing that's basically a blanket made out of synthetic material with like a thin outer shell fabric. And if I remember, and basically I think my quilt, which I always make them pretty big, I think mine probably weighed like 750 grams, 750, let's ballpark it, somewhere under 2 pounds. For sure it was under 2 pounds. I guarantee it was under 2 pounds. And I used that for years. If you compare that to a 5-pound sleeping bag, it's a huge savings. Now, fast forward a few years, with cottage companies, with actually big gear companies that have sort of caught on to the market wanting lighter weight gear. Well, I've got a -6 degrees Celsius sleeping bag here that's from a big company. It weighs under 2 pounds. It's it's a full mummy bag, and it's under 2 pounds. So in my mind, the gap between sleeping bags and quilts is shrinking. So in the past, a quilt really was a huge advantage, a way to save a ton of weight. But fast forward a few years to where we are now, I'm not sure that weight savings is that significant anymore for what you're getting out of it. Now, guaranteed, you will always be able to have an equivalent quilt that is lighter than the same sleeping bag. So if you take this sleeping bag, which isn't the premium product, but it's pretty high up there, and then you compare it to something like a Katabatic gear quilt that's the same temperature rating, the Katabatic gear quilt is lighter. So I'm looking at the 20 Fahrenheit model. I think for a tall wide, which is what I would get, would be comparable to this, would be like 25 ounces on their webpage. Now I've owned a Katabatic gear quilt before. They're 30 I think it's the Palisade or something like that. I own that. It's a super high quality product. Personally, I found the foot box too narrow. It was like just really constricted. It wasn't for me, but premium quality product. So if you look at their more comparable temperature rating, which is 20 Fahrenheit to this sleeping bag, 20 Fahrenheit, it comes in at 26 ounces. And this sleeping bag is a long model, fits me really well. It's got quite a bit of space inside, and it's 31 ounces. So you're talking 5 or 6 ounces different. People out there will say there's lighter quilts. 100% there are lighter quilts. You can get, you can get lighter sleeping bags. But if you match sleeping bag to quilt, the quilt will always be lighter. Now, does that mean that the weight savings always wins? So why did I get this sleeping bag? Well, I just found that I was sleeping better in my winter sleeping bag in like minus 15 Celsius in the winter than in the summer at around 5 degrees Celsius in my 20 Fahrenheit, -6 rated Jaxar Better quilt. And it's just because, I don't care what anyone says, I get drafts. Like it or not, a quilt isn't fully enclosed, and people are going to tell you, oh, but there's these drawstrings that you can put around to sort of seal it. You know what? At a certain point, you just start saying, that is just too much to deal with. I just want to get in my sleeping bag, zip it up, be warm. Not only that, a mummy sleeping bag has a whole enclosure around your head, which no quilt has. So if I look at something like the Katabatic Gear Palisade, 25 ounces. If I kind of want to match it with, this is the hard part, getting like the giant food in there and everything else. If I want to use something like the Palisade, I almost have to bring an insulated jacket with me. Now, some people are going to say I'm bringing it regardless. I don't. Depending on the conditions, I never wear them in the day. And at night, you know what? If you can just get in your tent really fast and your sleeping bag, it's just something else you don't need to bring. So if I compare the Palisade, which I'm going to call it a premium product, 25 ounces, and I need to bring an insulated jacket to be able to keep like a hood and stuff around my head and my upper torso warm, well the one I have weighs 14 ounces. It's not the lightest one in the world, but just to make a case, 25 plus 14, you're at 39 ounces. Well, my sleeping bag already beats that. And I'm convinced that the sleeping bag, completely shut with the hood, will be warmer than that quilt, even with a jacket, any day. Now, there's going to be people out there that say, that's what I do and I'm perfectly fine all the time. That's great. If your system works for you, it works for you. I'm not going to be one of those people that goes out, and this is where it's a little bit of a rant. I see myself switching back more from quilts to sleeping bags. Why? Because I'm just getting kind of tired of it. That being said, even for this trip that I'm planning for, I've been looking at the weather. The weather looks pretty warm all week. The lows are going down to 5. And if I was to bring my Jaxar Better quilt, even though it's not comparable in any way, it weighs 23 ounces, so I'd be saving half a pound, and it packs down way smaller. I'm the kind of person that's gonna flip the coin sometimes and just say, you know what, I'm gonna take the risk. I might be cold one night, but it's just one night, I'll survive, whatever. So, you know, am I gonna say, I'm done with quilts? Quilts are over, the quilts, you know, I'm never using a quilt again. No, and that's kind of the point of this talk, is that, you know, I find that that's one of the things that you see a lot on YouTube is, I'm over this, done with that. And I think there's all kinds of context that you have to use. You know, for sure, sometimes you're gonna use a certain product, like shoes or something that comfort, and just say, it's, in my opinion, it's not good. In this case, in my opinion, I think sleeping bags have really caught up to quilts. You know, there was a reason why quilts were kind of popularized and sold by so many cottage companies, because they're easy to make. I mean, I think that's one of the main ones. And that's why maybe someone like Ray Jardine made a quilt. Yeah, there's a weight savings if you don't have a zipper, but it's just also a lot easier to make something without a zipper. Think of the length of zipper that you need. It's hardly anything. Does that really add that much weight to it? Not if you use all the same materials. And the amount of material that you need to be able to drape over you properly, you know, ends up being almost enough to wrap around you. So why not just make a sleeping bag? I tend to think that quilts just became popular because they were definitely lighter and easy to make. If you're gonna make something yourself, it's way easier to make a quilt than a sleeping bag. Now the cottage companies, for them also, it's way easier to make a quilt. But the cottage companies' quality and expertise is kind of going up too. So I see them getting to a point where, you know what, they could make a sleeping bag. It could definitely compete with the weights of their quilts. And then you have, in my opinion, a piece of gear that can probably outperform the quilts. Overall, I just think you need to match your gear to your trip. Where I am in the Rockies, it actually gets pretty cold even in the summer. So it's calling for plus 30 Celsius in the city here for the rest of the week, but in the mountains, it's not gonna go up above 20 where I'm gonna be. The lows are around 5, and that's just based on the weather prediction. I'm gonna be just west of a huge glacier, so that has an impact, being on the mountains and stuff like that. So it could be colder. I could imagine going down to 0. So if I'm going below 5 degrees Celsius, close to 0, you know, weather can change 2 days out from now. You know, I just think that the sleeping bag for me on this trip is probably a better bet. Now, if I was from the East Coast, I've done so much stuff on the East Coast, I do not need a sleeping bag in the summer. You know, in the Appalachians or the Adirondacks, you have hot, humid weather for weeks on end. Do you need a mummy sleeping bag? No. So definitely, if I was out there, sometimes I'd even be using my 40-degree Enlightened Equipment synthetic quilt that weighs like 14 ounces. I'm never gonna say that I'm done with a certain kind of gear, especially when there's always gonna be certain trips that, you know, whether it's a quilt or a frameless backpack, there's gonna be trips where, you know, a frameless ultralight backpack like this is just not the right one. I'm gonna use my big ULA Catalyst that I can fit like 80 liters of gear into, and it has a frame and it has a hip belt and it has everything. For winter trips, I'm going to use that. So this notion of sort of being all one way or all the other, I just think it's a little bit extreme, a little bit clickbaity. And yeah, so those are my thoughts. I'm going to keep on packing up. I didn't get much packing done, so I'm going to get the rest of my gear in here. And tomorrow I'm heading out, and I will check back in with another video after this trip in a few weeks.